This shoe goes against so much of what so many runners believe, and it comes in at basically $500. So the question is this shoe really worth the price? Meet the Adidas Adizero Adios Pro Evo 1. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Rad Dad Bod TV. I'm your host, Eric McIntyre, aka Rad Dad Bod, and here we review running shoes. Now today we're talking about the Adidas Adizero Adios Pro Evo 1. That's a mouthful. And we're going to break down a couple of different aspects of the shoe, but if you're here for any particular topic, then feel free to check out the description below where I've time-stamped all the different aspects of said review. Now, if you do end up jumping around, I would really appreciate it if you came back at some point and watched the full video. I work really hard to make sure that these are detailed and comprehensive, put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into this so that we can make them good for you. Now, before we dive into the specifics of the shoe, I do want to just throw out some disclaimers or disclosures, which is that I actually did not get this shoe for free. I did not get this shoe through a PR agency. I did not get this shoe directly from Adidas. In fact, I got this shoe through a friend who got it through KickzCrew, which is a sneaker reselling website if you're not familiar. Now, as far as authenticity goes, it was part of the third batch from what I can tell. So it is number 730 out of 883 produced, but I did not go through a verification process myself. I trusted that KickzCrew's verification process was legit. So with that in mind, no one gets any influence on this review whatsoever. No one watches the review beforehand, and these thoughts are entirely my own. All right, with that out of the way, let's talk about the intended use of the shoe. So when the shoe first came out, the messaging around it was a little bit confusing, and many people thought that it was a single-use marathon shoe. But what did that exactly mean? What Adidas actually meant by that apparently was that this shoe is optimized for single race usage. So you do have a kind of break-in period or familiarization period. You could then race a full marathon in the shoe, and you may still have some miles left. In fact, I have seen some experiments going around of people taking these shoes not on 100-mile races, but through 100 miles, 200 miles, just to see how the shoe feels. And they have reported back that the shoe does last as long as most super shoes, but it does lose significant pop after that first initial marathon distance. As such, I will be reviewing this shoe as a marathon race shoe with the kind of mindset of, hey, it's not really built for durability or long-term use. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. The shoe comes in at $499.95. So it is basically 66 or 60-ish% more expensive than the large majority, if not more, than its marathon race counterparts from other brands, including its own brand counterpart, the Adios Pro 3. Now we'll talk about it much later in the review whether we feel that this shoe was worth it or not for the extra dollars, but just for context, I did actually wear this shoe through a familiarization period, and I did wear it through a full marathon. I wore it in Grandma's Marathon in Minnesota a couple of weeks ago. From a spec standpoint, this is where the shoe does start to really stand out. So from a weight standpoint, the shoe comes in at 4.6 ounces, which is for a lot of the lightest super shoes on the market, this is still like 3 full ounces lighter, which is insane. The heel stack is 38 millimeters and the forefoot stack is 32 millimeters for a 6 millimeter heel to toe drop. So it sits nicely for the large majority of foot strikes there with kind of a mid-foot drop. Now from a fit standpoint, and this is really important for this one because most people aren't going to be buying multiple sizes to try. In fact, most retailers are only going to allow you to purchase one. So you want to get your fit correct. Now the good news is I did feel like lengthwise the shoe fit true to size. Now I think that maybe people who are on the edge of their size may want to consider half sizing up, because although it is true to size, it is kind of slightly on the shorter side of true to size. But I think the bigger issue is more the fit of the toe box. It is very low volume. I wouldn't say it's a narrow toe box, but it is on the narrower end of standard, but it's really kind of the height of the shoe. There's not a whole lot of space in the shoe itself. From a midfoot standpoint, the midfoot runs a little bit narrow to standard, and then the heel I did find was pretty accommodating overall. So as a whole, I find the shoe to fit a little bit snug, a little bit narrow, which personally, I kind of like a slightly more snug feel in a racing shoe. But in the toe box in particular, it was very noticeable that there was not a ton of room. Now the upper itself is made of a lightweight mesh, and you can see basically everything. When you stick your hand in there, you can see your entire foot, you can see your shoes. The upper is crazy lightweight. Now for the most part, it's just a minimal upper. It's not supposed to do a whole lot. So you have like a little bit of cushioning in the heel. Other than that, you have this tongue that is not gusseted at all, but it is locked into the laces there. The tongue itself has a tiny bit of cushioning as well to just relieve a little bit of the lace pressure, and that's about it. The goal of this shoe was really to basically shave off as much weight as possible in a racing shoe, and so it's just very evident that that's what's going on in the upper. So from a durability standpoint, it's hard to talk about it in terms of like true longevity. When I first put the shoe on, I was like pretty worried that this was going to tear, and I was pretty skeptical that, you know, myself being 5'10", about 175, that like I was maybe too heavy for the shoe, that I might tear through it because it wasn't used to having that much force kind of going through it. When you compare me to, for example, like Olympic level marathoners, I'm 30, maybe even 40 pounds heavier than a lot of them. But luckily I found that the upper held up, and it's held up in every run since. I will probably put more miles on the shoe, to be honest, because they're a lot of fun to run in. But I didn't run into any durability, and the upper is crazy breathable because it just is kind of this super light mesh. I will say that the tongue bunches up, and because the shoe is so narrow and everything, and it's not gusseted, it's hard to kind of get your finger in there to just flatten that out. And so I had to make a concerted effort to really kind of loosen the laces up like crazy on the shoe so that I could get that fit and lockdown that I wanted. But once the shoe was fitted and locked down on the foot, it felt really good, and I did not feel any shifting around. I will say on my very first run, I did get a little bit of a hot spot here kind of on the inner arch of my foot, but after that initial run, I never felt it anymore. And you can see there is no sock liner or liner at all in the shoe, and so I was concerned again about there being stitching in the shoe and how that might rub on the feet. I had no issues whatsoever in any run other than my very first one. From a lockdown standpoint, I felt like the shoe did pretty good. I did have to use a runner's knot in order to get really kind of that pinch there at the top of the foot, top of the ankle, to make sure that the heel didn't slide up. But again, I wore this for a full marathon. At no point was I really concerned about anything with the shoes at all. And so lockdown was good. The heel is where you may notice a little bit of slippage, but again, with a runner's knot, should be golden. Moving to the midsole. Now the midsole is a single piece of light strike foam, and this process allowed the shoe to stay super lightweight, but it's not pressure treated like a lot of running shoe foams. So usually the process to create a midsole is they take some type of compounds, maybe it's like a kind of liquidy rubber compound, they pour it into a mold, they pressure treat it, it solidifies. With this, it seems that they basically took large pieces of foam and they basically just laser cut them out, so these foams have not been compressed. And that's part of why this shoe is supposed to be single race optimized, because as you run in the shoe, that foam will condense more and more. Now the feel of the foam itself is super unique. I can't think of another shoe that has a similar feel. It almost feels like a magic eraser, or like kind of like that flower pot foam that we all used to poke holes in as a kid. That's kind of what the foam feels like. It almost feels like it's going to deteriorate in your hand, but it is very responsive. It's not responsive in the sense of like just this like crazy spring back. It's not a firm foam where you just kind of get that like that ground feel and pop off the ground. Instead, it just kind of works. It almost compresses like a sponge, but then you do get kind of that return and that rebound, and it just keeps your feet feeling really light as you go. I think a big part of that too is it does have carbon fiber infused energy rods throughout the shoe. I believe there are 5 rods that kind of follow your toes essentially, or follow the bones in your feet and how those are aligned. And so it is actually very stiff in terms of that flex of the shoe. It's hard to flex it, but it's not super harsh on the foot like a lot of the other foams in super shoes. I have heard some that the more you run in it, the more you can actually start to feel those rods because the foam starts to compress. And you can actually see right there with the glare, the rods are starting to almost protrude through the foam because it's compressed so much that the rods are starting to really kind of shape inside there. So durability of the foam, I mean, it's not made to be durable at all. But at a marathon race distance, it gave me enough return. I had no concerns, and the shoe felt really smooth in terms of that rocker transition. It really kind of propels you forward onto that midfoot or toe area, or forefoot area. And it was my favorite feeling foam underfoot out of all of the super shoes, as much as I don't actually want to admit that, if I'm being honest, because personally I don't think that we should have single race optimized $500 shoes, just like fundamentally. But if I'm just evaluating the shoe in terms of performance, it is my favorite foam. It's very comfortable, it's very responsive, it's very fun. Now, from a stability standpoint, I did find that yes, there was a little lack of motion control whatsoever, but that's going to be common for 99.9% of race shoes, super shoes, so I wouldn't necessarily dock it. It's no less stable than the majority of super shoes. And then in terms of like pace versatility of the shoe, I mean, you probably, like, I warmed up in the shoe, like you can go slow in the shoe. During kind of like jog intervals for some of the workouts I took it through, it was hard to slow down. So I'm not going to say that it lacks pace versatility, because I do feel like the shoe is so light and so smooth that you could run any pace in it and feel comfortable. But the shoe wants to go fast. And part of that is because of the weight. Most people just aren't going to be used to having a shoe this light on foot, and naturally that's going to put a little pep in your step. Now this shoe gets crazier and crazier because the outsole is super unique. It is actually, from my understanding, a liquid rubber that they pour in a thin layer that then solidifies, and you've basically just got coverage in these three areas. My understanding is this is the same rubber compound that race cars actually use. And I was very skeptical and worried. I actually brought a backup pair of shoes for my race because it rained almost the entire marathon. But I tested these out. I actually soaked them in water or got them wet and then tried to run on tile in them and everything, just to make sure I wouldn't be slipping around. And the traction of this rubber is actually pretty insane. I ran, again, the entire race pretty much in the rain, had water splashed on me to cool myself down, ran through puddles, and they were super locked in. I had no concerns of slippage. The only times when I would kind of have to be a little bit cautious were, one, if I was running on the painted lines of the road. Those got extra slick, and I don't know that any rubber would have done well on those, so we just avoided those lines. And then the other situation, which was fairly unique, was when stepping in a deeper puddle. This foam is very buoyant, and so it wanted to float on top of the puddle, and it was almost like forcing a kickboard, one of those foam kickboards, down into a pool to submerge it, and then it pops up. You would kind of get this stall almost as you pressed on the water, and then it would compress down and you'd launch, and that did cause you to slide a little bit. So long as I wasn't going in deep puddles or running on the painted lines on the road, then this traction was a 10 out of 10. In those scenarios, it was still okay. I still was totally fine, but again, any shoe, I probably would have avoided those situations if I could have. Now, from a durability standpoint, you can kind of see maybe on the toe cap there that there's kind of a shine on that rubber, and then here in the forefoot area, that shine is gone. I don't think the rubber is going to be durable. It's a very thin layer. It is very grippy, but again, the shoe is not made for even, frankly, like 100 miles. The shoe is probably made for 50 or so. So with all that in mind, I feel like the shoe does what it's intended to do. Now, who's it for? I mean, it's for marathon racers. Frankly, it's probably for sponsored athletes. It's probably not for me, and that's the reality. But as a shoe reviewer, as a running shoe junkie, I had to get my hands on them. I had to try them, knowing that they were out there, and I really enjoyed the shoe. Are they worth the $250 to $300 extra dollars over other brand super shoes, or even the Pro 3 from Adidas? It depends. I think that the unique scenario in which case these shoes might be worth it is if you are someone who is going for like a lifetime PR or a Boston qualifier, and this is the shoe that's going to give you the confidence and just the pop to just kind of get over the edge. And again, I don't think, like, I'm not a believer that the shoe makes the runner, so I'm not a believer that like a shoe is going to give you a crazy PR. But a shoe could prevent a crazy PR, in my opinion, right? If you choose the wrong shoe, it can be very detrimental to the race versus choosing the shoe that's maybe going to give you like a 1% gain. Well, if this gives you an extra 1% and that's what pushes you from, a 2:58 marathon to a 2:55 marathon, because that's where the marathon cutoff is probably going to be this year for the Boston qualifiers, well, then in that scenario, I think the other question you would ask yourself is, would you pay an extra $200 to $300 to guarantee that you get the PR and qualify for Boston? In which case, I do think there are a lot of people who would say yes. But fundamentally, I don't think that this shoe should frankly exist, at least as is marketed, at least as is constructed. But what I am excited about is to see some of these materials kind of trickle down into the everyday use models, into the super shoes that Adidas puts out, the Pro 4. I believe that they're creating one called the Evo C, which is almost like a slightly dumbed down version of this, right? So I'm excited to see the tech translate, but this probably shouldn't have been produced at even the scale that it was, but I get it. Now from a comparison standpoint, well, there's not a lot of shoes that really compare to this one because it is so unique. As far as feel though, I would say maybe the foam feels the closest to the SC Elite from New Balance, but the spring from the carbon fiber rods as well as the return of the Light Strike Pro foam is significantly more than the SC Elite. A lot of people actually have complaints that the SC Elite just isn't quite as bouncy as they would like. And then the other shoe where I feel like at least the general setup of the shoe feels very similar, with the disclaimer that I have not tried the Adidas Adios Pro 3, because I would imagine that that setup is honestly or obviously going to be the closest to the Evo 1, but I did find that the Saucony Endorphin Elite kind of felt similar in terms of kind of overall setup of how the foot kind of rolls through, just less aggressive so actually with the Evo 1. The Evo 1 is just very comfortable through your stride. Final thoughts on the shoe. It frankly lives up to the hype. I mean, there's a reason I chose it for my 1A race, my marathon that I ran this year. It's very, very comfortable. It's very accommodating. I don't feel like it really breaks down your lower limbs the same way that a lot of other super shoes do this year. And so I feel like honestly anyone could run in these shoes, but obviously the price point is going to limit who is going to run in these shoes because it's a very, very expensive and not durable shoe. Like I said earlier, I am excited to see what Adidas does in terms of the Pro 4, the Evo C, if we're going to get a lot of this technology trickling down. I'm curious to see what the other brands do in response to this. What are we going to see in 2025? Are we going to see a bunch of new kind of crazy models? We've already seen On Cloud Boom Strike in the LS version with a spray printed upper. So there's going to be a lot of brands out there kind of trying to create the lightest possible shoe now going forward, which I do think is good for super shoes as a whole. But hopefully we can do them at more cost effective, or at least more cost-effective price points for the everyday person, so that everyone gets a chance to try out some amazing shoes, and hopefully we can make them a little bit more durable. So there you go. That's my review of the Adidas Adios Adizero Pro Evo 1. If you've got any questions about the shoe, obviously drop them in the comments, and if you haven't already, please give this video a like and shoot me a follow, as it goes a long way in helping me continue to make these awesome videos for you. Appreciate all your time, and have a wonderful day.